Hi everyone, Sandra Duran Wilson here, and welcome to Mixed Media Soul Sparks. Every week I bring you painting, mixed media techniques, studio tips, and inspiration tools. And this week I want to talk about and share with you transfers. This is where it all began for me, with gel transfers. And the first book that I did was called Image Transfer Workshop. And I have had probably more questions over the years about transfers. So I thought I'd really bring this to the forefront and talk about why would you want to do a transfer and what's the purpose of it. And there are so many. So first I want to show you an idea of imagery. Now this is an ad from a magazine. And you can see that I just pulled it out of the magazine and I made a laser copy. Now I want to point out that you could make a gel transfer from either the original magazine or from a copy, but it has to be a laser copy. And the advantage of doing it from a laser copy is that you can keep this original, and it's also not quite as messy when you rub the paper off because you don't have that ink on the back. I can also work with scale and a lot of different things that I'll discuss with you about transfers. One of the things though, when you look at what you're going to use for your transfer, I want to talk about color for a minute. In here, it's kind of a pale yellow, which that's pretty much going to go transparent because when you print something on paper, there's no white ink that gets printed onto here. It's just the white of the paper which is coming through. And in a gel transfer, we're going to be using gel gloss to glue this on to a surface, and then we're going to remove this paper. So whatever is white or a light color like this is going to show the color behind it. And let me just show you as kind of a stepped out piece of what I'm talking about. And here are two different examples of the same image put over different backgrounds. And let me show you this original image. This image is again taken from a magazine. It was an ad for a house paint company, and so it's all their empty paint cans. So you can see where some of them are white and some of them are very light yellow. What I want you to look at is like right in here, because that background I made using the alcohol drops, the resist, getting a very different colored background. So when I put the transfer on, those areas that were white or light colored are going to show that background. So this is why you might do a transfer, is you want to start to integrate these layers, and you're going to be able to see these unusual textures coming through. So when you choose the image that you want to use, you don't necessarily want to choose an image that's going to match your background. You need something that's going to complement it. So think about like if you're doing glaze layers. Here, if you look at some of these darker ones, on this piece, they start to disappear. Whereas on here, they're a little different because the background is different. Same up here, this area, this was one of the white ones, and this is showing the turquoise. So these are all factors that you need to think about when you're going to do a transfer. You want to think about the background colors, and you want to think about the image colors and how those are going to read. So I want to just share one other idea. This is, for me, it's like where I get a lot of inspiration from and looking at images in a different way. So this particular image is, you might be able to tell what it is, maybe you can't. But if you look at it this way, maybe you can. It's out of a magazine, and it's a sandwich. I'm not going to, but you can see the bread. And when you cut it down and you start to just come in and look at just parts of it, you begin to see shapes, you begin to see colors. You don't see it as a sandwich. And you would know that these colors are going to be transparent. You might see these lines when you do your transfer. So I want you to start looking at imagery in new ways. And it's like, how can I take that imagery, crop it, and make it into something new and different? You're never going to look at a magazine the same way. I never look at magazines for that reason. I'm always like, oh, I could do this. And, like the other one was a lipstick ad. Now, here's another idea. This is from a poster. It was like I think it was like on a telephone pole in New Orleans. And it had all the posters and things were being peeled off. And I took a photograph of it and just printed it out. And this is what I'm going to be using on my transfer today. So I could choose different parts. I could choose this section because it's very light here, and then I've got some darker areas. These are all options. What's another reason you would do a transfer? Now, some of you might recognize some of these images. This technique has been around for a while. These are pages from National Geographic, and you use Citrusol on them to actually melt the ink on the pages. And a lot of people use them in collage. So here's the ad on the back side of the page, and here it's melted, and you get these interesting effects. Maybe I'll show that to you later on. And the reason I would do a transfer for this is I would take this and go to the office supply store, a place where you can make a laser copy, and then you can work with scale. Because when you start to blow this up, then maybe people are not going to identify it as, oh, I know what that is. Another reason to do a transfer. And here is my favorite reason why to do a transfer. So let's say you have some beautiful leaves that you picked up in the fall, and you've made copies of them. Well, if you've ever tried to put the leaves into your artwork, you know that it doesn't last very long. It's not easy to do. So I put them on the copy bed of the laser printer, and I made a photocopy. Now I can take these, I could either collage or I could transfer them in. So the same idea, whether it's collage or transfer, you're going to make something more permanent and more stable. Here's another thing. This was one of my favorite things to do, and it's using a bleach pen on top of black paper. And it's going to start to break apart. It's not stable at all. But before it started to crumble like this, I took it and I made a photocopy of it. So now I have it permanently here, and I can make a transfer or collage with it. This piece, because it has so much dark, it may not be such a great idea for transfer. But when I change the scale on it, and I start to get these beautiful crackles, then it's going to make a very interesting transfer. So those are several reasons why you would want to do a transfer. So now that you've got all of these wonderful ideas and you're going to start to look for things, let me show you how to do the transfer. And I already showed you these. But I'm going to start with this step right here, and then I'll come back and I'll show you how you take the paper off. So the first thing you have to do is decide what's going to show up. Now, these are very similar colors, and didn't I just say that you should have different colors? Well, yeah, sometimes those show up best, but sometimes subtlety is nice. So I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at how this is going to fit onto here. And I don't know if you noticed, but one of the things you need to do is you need to flip numbers. But this one, it doesn't really matter because they can read as 9 or 8, or so they kind of work both ways. But what I want to look at here is this dark area, this dark area. Do I want it there, or do I want the dark area to go up here? And do I want the numbers showing here? If I go this way, these numbers are going to appear up here. I think I'm going to do it this way. So these are all questions you need to ask yourself. basic step on how to do this, you need soft gel gloss. I know a lot of people who've done transfers using matte medium. They've been taught that in the past. And I don't recommend it because the matte medium is going to diffuse your imagery. And you're not going to be able to see it as well. It's going to be foggy. So I'm going to use the gloss, and I can always diffuse things later. I can always change that final sheen. And I'm just using my knife to spread a nice layer of gel. And I had already cut my paper to be the same size as this. However, you don't have to do a transfer the whole size. You could just do a part of it. I've had students, when I'm teaching transfers, that's their first transfer, and they're like, oh, I want to transfer this really big piece. And I'm like, no, you don't. And they're like, yeah, I do. And it's like, no, you're going to have to rub all of that paper off. You won't have any fingertips left. And so about halfway through it, they're like, oh, I see what you mean. So there we go. Now this surface was fairly smooth. That's another piece you want to look at. And here's a little tip. If I put this dry paper directly onto that wet gel, it's going to want to wrinkle up. And that I'm going to let it do because I want it to kind of accentuate these wrinkles. However, if you were doing an image of a bird or a face or something more realistic, you may not want to do that. And if that were the case, then you would take your image and you would just lightly mist it with water. And that's going to keep it from wrinkling so much. But here I did want it to wrinkle. This is the most important part of your gel transfer, is that you want the gel to be wet. You don't want to walk away and let the gel start to dry. And you need to get this on, and you don't want to get any of this gel on the back, because even like right there where I'm pressing it out and I see some of that gel coming off there, if I get it on the back of this paper, it's going to keep the paper there. I'm not going to be able to remove the paper. Now, it's nice to have a brayer to use, but if you don't, I just use my bottle. But you want to be really careful that you don't roll it over to the edge and then roll some of that gel back on. So for that reason, I tend to just use my hands because I can feel if there's big lumps of gel. You see how it's getting kind of wrinkled there? I don't know if you can really see it. It's just barely. So the only place the image will transfer is where the image is making direct contact with the wet gel, and you let it dry overnight. This is also a very important piece. You can't just let this dry for an hour. Half of your transfer will rub off. You really have to let it dry overnight. Now, yeah, if you did this at the very start of the day, you might be able to do it at the end of the day. But I always say give it a good 12 hours to really dry, especially if you've put on a pretty thick coat of the gel. So we are going to let this dry, and then we're going to rub the paper off. So come back next week and we'll see how the transfer turns out. So I want you to ask any questions in the video. If you like the video, like it, ask some questions. Let me know what you'd like to explore next. I'm always open to ideas of mixed media techniques and inspiration tips. So thanks for joining me this week, and check out the website for any upcoming workshops. Join the community and share your creations on social. Use the hashtag #MixedMediaSoulSparks. I look forward to seeing your comments in the comment section.